Sur une question forestière canadienne importante comme la gestion écosystémique et les normes des certifications forestières, que pouvez-vous dire sur la mise en œuvre de telles stratégies et comment elles peuvent différer dans le processus à travers le Canada et leur succès ou résultats?
Oui, bien, c'est une vaste question. D'abord, je dirais que la plupart des gouvernements provinciaux ont, au fil du temps, modifié leur régime forestier pour inclure la notion d'aménagement écosystémique. Donc, on est passé de régime qui avait principalement des cibles sur le fait de pouvoir maintenir dans le temps les approvisionnements, à des cibles qui incluent maintenant également le maintien de la représentativité des écosystèmes par rapport à leur état de nature ou par rapport à quels écosystèmes étaient présents historiquement sur le territoire. Donc ça, on le retrouve dans les régimes forestiers, dans les objectifs légaux. Donc quand on développe le plan d'aménagement, ça va faire partie des objectifs à évaluer et auxquels répondre. Même chose du côté des certifications. Donc au Canada, il y en a 3 qui s'appliquent. La Canadian Standard Association, je connais les noms en anglais. Probablement l'Association de normalisation du Canada a un standard. Il y a un standard nord-américain qui s'applique au Canada et aux États-Unis, l'initiative de foresterie durable, Sustainable Forestry Initiative. Et il y a un standard aussi international qui a un chapitre au Canada, donc le Forest Stewardship Council. Tous ces standards-là, eux, plutôt que d'être des changements de loi qui, dans le cas des provinces, arrivent pas souvent et peuvent prendre beaucoup de temps. Les lois forestières ne changent pas souvent, les réglementations évoluent, mais les lois sont révisées moins souvent. Ces standards de certification-là, eux, sont négociés entre les parties. Donc, c'est des tables multipartites avec des gens de l'industrie, des syndicats, des groupes d'intérêt et des groupes environnementaux qui négocient et s'entendent sur les standards qui, eux, touchent à l'aménagement écosystémique. And if I might summarize in English, ecosystem-based management is now embedded in most provincial forest regime regulations or even legislation. It happened at different point in time over the last couple of decades. We moved from management regimes that were primarily focused on the sustainability of the ability to maintain productivity and to ensure that volumes would never be harvested more than they grow, to now also including targets around maintaining ecosystem status as closely aligned to with the natural state of these ecosystems. So both are now tracked and measured through policy, regulation, legislation, what most refer to as ecosystem-based management. This concept also applies in forest certification. In that case, forest certification standards are negotiated between different parts of a civil society, from the economic sector, environmental groups to different interest groups.
C'est bon, c'est bon. La prochaine question, c'est plus sur la société canadienne et de quelle manière direz-vous que le secteur forestier aide à les travailleurs ruraux et aussi à les communautés ruraux.
On est actif dans plus de 600 communautés au pays. Et je ne me souviens pas du nombre exact, mais il y a un nombre significatif de ces communautés-là qui sont aussi économiquement dépendantes d'un seul secteur ou de 2 secteurs qui sont liés aux ressources naturelles. Donc, c'est fondamental, c'est très porteur dans plusieurs régions. Le secteur forestier fait vivre la région, fait vivre les communautés. Alors, c'est d'autant plus important que donc que ce soit gardé en tête quand les politiques publiques sont mises en place et qui ont un impact sur le secteur, de s'assurer de garder en tête les impacts qu'ils peuvent avoir dans les communautés, parce que la dernière chose que nos membres veulent faire, c'est de fermer des usines et d'avoir des impacts sociaux importants dans les communautés où ils opèrent. Donc, on fait tout ce qu'on peut pour demeurer en opération, tout en évidemment respectant tous les cadres de durabilité, mais c'est une considération qui est constante pour nous, pour les forestiers. Donc, l'aménagement, oui, d'une forêt durable, mais aussi de communautés durables est très important. And if I might summarize, we're active, as mentioned, in beyond 600 communities across the country, lifeblood in many of these, a number of them being dependent upon natural resource sector, sometimes only forestry, sometimes joint with other sector. But therefore, it's very important to think forest policy, not only in terms of being sustainable regarding forest health, but also regarding communities' health, which is fundamental.
La dernière question que je vais poser, c'est comment les entreprises forestières de toutes les provinces ont-elles pris des mesures pour minimiser des impacts environnementaux de la foresterie? Je sais que vous avez parlé beaucoup de ça, mais juste comme en approfondissement.
Encore une fois, c'est un vaste sujet, puis il pourrait y avoir plusieurs exemples, mais peut-être pour y aller avec les bases, une des façons, règle du pouce, d'évaluer sur le terrain, est-ce que l'impact, parce qu'il y a toute la planification macro avec les besoins des espèces et tout, mais si on regarde les opérations terrain, parmi les choses qu'on veut s'assurer, on regarde beaucoup l'impact sur, par exemple, les cours d'eau. Donc, est-ce qu'il y a sédimentation? Est-ce qu'il y a érosion? Est-ce qu'on a été capable de maintenir le sol en place? Est-ce qu'on a les bons buffers qui font qu'il n'y a pas de sédimentation qui va passer de la coupe vers les ruisseaux? Est-ce que les ponceaux? Est-ce que la route? Donc, comment on développe nos réseaux routiers? Comment on met en place les bonnes zones tampons pour s'assurer qu'il n'y ait pas d'impact sur la qualité de l'eau? Ça, c'est un des exemples qui peut être assez évident sur le terrain et qui reflète l'évolution des bonnes pratiques qui ont évolué passablement avec à la fois la connaissance, les meilleures techniques mises en place, des réglementations plus serrées, mais aussi l'amélioration de la machinerie qui a permis d'une part d'être moins lourde, d'autre part d'aller chercher les arbres plus loin, jusqu'à au-delà de 10 mètres de la machine. Donc, ça fait énormément de sol qui ne sera pas compacté, qui ne sera pas érodé, où la régénération, la petite régénération va pouvoir survivre sans problème. Donc, c'est ça. À l'échelle du parterre de coupe, des bons exemples, c'est l'amélioration des pratiques et des techniques pour ce qui ont trait à protéger les sols, protéger la régénération, protéger l'eau, en ayant des approches plus raffinées. On en a appris beaucoup sur comment opérer dans des pentes, comment opérer, comment identifier de façon appropriée les milieux humides, éviter les milieux humides, utiliser la coupe sur sol gelé en hiver pour protéger les sols, ce genre de techniques s'ajoute à tout ce qui est la planification macro, de s'assurer qu'on maintient les bons écosystèmes en quantité suffisante pour les espèces de la région. So, in summary again, some let's say, more on the ground example of how we've improved our or in ways we minimize impacts on the environment is to look at our impacts on the waterways through erosions and soil quality, soil erosion, soil compaction, to maintain the regeneration that is established, as well as to avoid movements of sedimentation to any streams. So we use buffer areas to maintain soil quality, and also to maintain shades on the streams. We also have fairly advanced over the years the how we do road building, even temporary roads that are meant to be removed later will still be done in a way that minimize how they will impact water quality. And the machinery has also evolved quite a bit to be lighter, so as to compact less of soil and to have arms that can reach beyond 10 meters far from the machine to grab trees without damaging the soil further than where they stand.
So I had a question. As an environmental student, I know a lot of my colleagues have wondered about this as well over the years. So what is the policy on old growth forests and old growth trees, and how do you guys manage that?
Yeah, very good question. So it's primarily managed, well, it's managed, technically it's different in each province because the regulations are provincial. But as mentioned earlier, we're now largely working in regulations that focus on ecosystem-based management. So you look at the proportion of different forest types that were in place historically through different means of studies, and that gives you a point of reference. And then you look at your current status of forest and set targets to move your status as much within these targets over time as possible. So forest age and the distribution of what was the natural forest age is an important part of these targets, and important to then understand and see that even in a natural state with untouched forests, in Canada's forests, which are more than 3/4 boreal, many of these forests burn on a regular basis and therefore were renewed naturally. And it was not a monolithic block of old growth all across the historical forests that we used to have. So that's how we look at what should be the range if these forests were in their natural state. How much we have now? Do we have too much? In some cases, in many cases, in fact, due to our approach to fire management, which has been to suppress as many fires as possible within the managed forest. That's a paradigm that is shifting. We're seeing that it's over time having the negative impact of creating fire fuel buildup, where if you are successful in removing many fires from an area, then the trees will die on foot and will fall off, and then a new forest will try to take over, but there will be a significant fuel load. And you also, at the landscape level, can end up with more old growth forest than typically. And that so that can be counterintuitive to many, but the situation of do we have too few old growth forests in some areas that have been more intensively managed over a longer period, notably before such ecosystem-based management targets were put in place, or do we have too many in some areas that have been much less managed and have been subjects to fire protection? That's for the old growth forest, less so for old growth tree. That becomes more a very a narrower subject of interest in some forests in BC, particularly and there is some tree-specific regulation in BC when trees reach a certain diameter, which I'm not an expert on as being a Quebec trained forester, but there's regulation to protect trees based on certain diameters. But there is some, there can be some confusion in the old growth debate in BC, notably because there's a mix between, are we talking about old growth forests, old growth trees, old growth forests that have that include old growth trees, because they're very different. We can look at some of the oldest forests in the country have tiny trees that grow in the cold, as opposed to have coastal trees that grow in the constant rain. So you have to, so in the policies have to be clear about what is the value you're looking at, what's the landscape status of that value, and what's your protection objective. But it really depends on the, but on these different scales and values. So it's hard to give one definitive answer, varies per province. But the generic frame is to compare with what was natural, what's your status, what's your objective.
You mentioned that Canada is unique in that we have an area which would be a combination of protected forest and part for production, even in lands designated for harvest. Can you please explain the different definitions of intact forest, degradation, and deforestation, and what that means for Canada given our unique forestry management?
Yeah, I'll see what I can do on that complex one, but yeah, fascinating questions and subject that come up often. So for the easier one is deforestation. Deforestation is easily defined as cutting trees and not wanting to have trees come back. So you deforest to do agriculture, you deforest to do urban development, you deforest to do a hydro site, a mining site, whatever. In forestry context, that's where it gets trickier. Say, okay, well, now I'm harvesting. I still want a forest to grow there because I'm a forester, I need forest. Depending on my management technique or how sustainable the frame is it going to be a degraded forest where I've done a very poor job and now I've done forest degradation? Like I forest mine, run away, it grows again, but it's going to be whatever. Or am I going to be reproducing a sustainable forest? And is it, then we can ask, if it's going to be the same composition or not, but that's beyond the question. But that's how then I parse the degradation versus sustainable harvest category. And then in terms of defining what is primary, what is intact, there's just many definitions at play here, as well as perception. What I'll say is that in Canada, we have a lot of these intact virgin primary forests. A stat that I have not mentioned before is that it's roughly half of our total forest that we do manage. I said that in the managed forests, we harvest half. But before that, there's another half of our forest that is either in parks or in non-designated areas for management, which means that a significant area of Canada's forest will remain intact. Even if we were to harvest tomorrow morning, all the ones that are designated for harvest will probably be the country that over time retains the most primary and intact forests because of our stringent forest regimes. So that's for context, but then you need to go in definitions. Primary forest is the concept used by the UN, but they're flexible on how they define it. Intact forest landscapes is a concept that was developed by a coalition of group of interest led by the World Resource Institute. And it's a more united definition because they go through satellite imagery. But yeah, but suffice to say, well, maybe one thing that I'll stop with intact forests is, yeah, we leave a lot of forests intact, and in where we manage, then we do conservation and manage area. But then depending on your definition, you'll consider that these are still intact or not, still primary or not. That depends what filter you want to be applying.